This is Narratives and Ideology, take one. There are some things which are inescapable when it comes to creating digital content for the media, which are so ingrained in the very foundations of visual storytelling, they simply become a part of the text identity. Two of those things are narrative and ideology. Let's first begin by defining what narrative and ideology actually are, so we can better understand how they interplay into these two texts. Ideologies are defined by a set of values and beliefs, which are shown and reflected through either the actions or behaviors, and which are influenced by society, political tensions, and/or individualist identity. Narrative, on the other hand, is a story, an account of a string of events occurring in a space and a time. They do not unfold randomly, but rather as an occurred series of events connected to the logic of cause and effect. When looking at both Mike Judge's Office Space and John Wells' Maid, formerly based off the book Maid, Hard Work, Low Pay, and a Mother's Will to Survive by Stephanie Land, we can see that they both cling to the very different ideologies and narrative structures. Before we dive into each specific text, however, let's define the two types of ideologies. First, beginning with implicit, which are assumed values we must infer through subtle actions and behavioral changes through the director's lens. The other is explicit ideology, which are obvious pushes for a particular belief or value the director intends. This form of ideology portrayal sets up to challenge and question the audience's positions in a more prominent way. Digressing back to the 1999 classic workplace comedy Office Space, it is crucial we explore the institutional, historical, and social context of the time. It holds the explicit ideology of capitalism, portraying the inner tech workplace in a highly bureaucratic manner. Subtle links to the implicit ideology of masculinism is shown through the positioning of males in the workplace, showing the disparity in their power over the rest of the characters. The 90s through the 2000s show a huge increase in the awareness of a technological presence. Early computers were introduced, and the Y2K bug was a readily mentioned topic of conversation. Politics and war-driven tensions such as the Persian Gulf War and civil rights movement across the globe, especially those in America and the youth rallies in the United Kingdom, saw a huge increase in the political tensions of the time. At first viewing in 1999, Judge's Office Space was seen as oppositional. That is something which is quite subversive and which society may reject. It was agitational to the Hollywood formula of filmmaking at the time, and this was something the Judge knew. It received heavy criticism upon the release, but was later accepted by younger generations as a catalyst to good change in the corporate industry. Before Office Space was even realized, jobs such as the one it depicts were in dire conditions, and while it turns the regimented and systematic environments into a comedy spin-off, it is key to understand that this idea of efficiency over employees was something that was regarded amongst a number of institutions. People were seen as numbers on a record sheet, and workers who lagged behind were made redundant within days. This idea of methodical removalism of workers is made clear by Judge's caricatures of the Bobs, who make fun and games out of employees' legitimate futures.
We're going to be getting rid of these people here. First, Mr. Samir, not going to work here anymore anyway.
Through Mike Judge's crafted hand, Bill Lumbergh stands out from the rest of the cast as a caricature of a wealthy, high-ranking business boss, presented to us through the lens of Peter, someone who is much lower on the workplace hierarchy. Lumbergh cares for employees as much as he does for reading a single TPS report. That is, not a lot at all. And he's so fixated on the idea of him being number one that he forgets the rest of his employees. His whole identity becomes this idea of being the number one, being the boss, and for him not to have that, seen especially when Peter's return from the hypnotherapist, places him in such a vulnerable state. It is also important to know that Office Space is just a representation of a more holistic idea, this idea of a rebellion against a workplace. Another thing to note surrounding this idea of systematically enforced neoclassical ideology in Office Space is Max Weber's 1930s iron cage. The iron cage is a notion defined as the increased in rationalization inherent in social life, particularly in Western capitalist societies. The iron cage thus traps individuals in systems based purely on teleological efficiency, rational calculation, and control. The idea came around at the time of Durkheim and Marx, both of whom were very inspirational in the creation of a newborn generation of philosophical thinking.
Really appreciate it. It's very special.
Now, Milton, don't be greedy. Let's pass it along and make sure everyone gets a piece.
Okay, but last time I didn't receive a piece, and I was told that
Just pass.
Focusing more now on the institutional context of both Office Space and Maid, we can see multiple similarities and disparities between the distribution of the audience at the time. Office Space, being introduced and released well before the internet, let alone streaming services, was brought into the traditional cinemas on February 19, 1999. It made $4.2 million on its opening weekend, but then began to decline precipitously, and after ending March, it was pulled from release altogether. According to Judge, the studio executive blamed the movie exclusively for the failure. failure, telling him, "Nobody wants to see your little movie about ordinary people in their little boring lives." Also to note is how the appetite of media consumption has changed drastically from the 90s to now a much more globalized and radicalized world. Social contexts and trends of the public eye, influenced heavily by social media, have reshaped what we as audience are willing to watch, sometimes to our own detriment. More access to the internet has shown an increase in the notion of this poverty porn, an idea that privileged individuals find pleasure in watching the struggles of others, and we cannot help but think that John Wells' Maid highlights this problem in a modern society. Maid, on the other hand, saw a much more modern increase, arriving to Netflix on October 1st, 2021, as a limited drama series with only 10 episodes. Being a TV series, it was never shown in cinemas, unlike some of Netflix's most recent releases, and so audience had to have a subscription to be able to view the content. Another point of Maid's release was that within Netflix itself, there are algorithms which are put in place to predict, suggest, and recommend shows that might be more attracted to by younger audiences. Entities such as the search history and top 10 are all used to push the content towards the users, which thinks it aligns with their own beliefs and values. This can be seen as an institutional difference or change, and brings a new variable into the mix, which are called political bubbles or echo chambers. Echo chambers are defined as, in discussions of the news, media, and politics, a situation in which beliefs are amplified or reinforced by communication and repetition inside a closed system and insulated from rebuttal. Ergo, Maid would only be suggested to users if their ideologies aligned with Wells' own. Speaking of which, what are they? John Wells aimed to produce Maid in response to a large amount of petitioning and social awareness which was being raised at the time. The hashtag #MeToo movement influenced in the choice of a female protagonist, as well as the choice to indulge in the serious themes of domestic violence, abuse, and trauma. These ideas, which had originally been shunned before, were now brought to light by Wells' creation. The explicit ideology of classism is portrayed through the challenging welfare and public housing system that Alex is forced to navigate. This then provokes the idea of the American dream being this unreachable goal for the female protagonist, and becomes a reflection on the real world of a modern America and its population.
So you're looking for a big fat government handout because you are a jobless, white trash piece of shit. Am I right? What? Your form? You gonna give that to me?
More implicitly, capitalism and feminism shine through small portions of Wells' depiction of the brutal world the young pair must face. Sean can be seen as a very complex and multifaceted character, which Wells curates for his audience in so many ways. He's the reason in which Alex finds herself scrubbing the toilets and navigating the Byzantine welfare system to provide herself and their 2-year-old daughter Maddie a place to live. He incites a large amount of her grief, and this in turn leads to a large majority of her distress.
I'm Alex, by the way. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to, use real names here.
Oh, that's entirely up to you. Some girl's calling herself Yasmina Jade Sky over there, and we all know that's a bunch of bullshit. But, my real name is Danielle.
My real name's Alex.
Another thing to note on Maid is this idea of real names as a form of identity in the domestic violence shelter. Through the exchange between Danielle and Alex, we see how important this confidentiality of one's name is in a world that's as corrupt as the one in which Wells depicts. Furthermore, this idea of solidarity on Alex's part is seen most prominently during the court scene, when no one is on Alex's side of the benches, showing her lack of support. There's a dilemma in which Wells incites through Maid, as we as the audience have seen Sean as both someone who has great faults, but is also someone who has a moral obligation to show his love for Alex and Maddie. A quote from Margaret Quarterly, the actor who played Alex, in an interview with Grazia Newsfeed is saying,
"While Alex was able to persevere and navigate these really challenging circumstances, the truth of the matter is that so many people in the same situation don't have the same luck."
The thing which stands out to me the most about Maid is its significant impact it's had on people it has reached. We're talking about stories, incidents, identities being shared that people would otherwise remain silent. The fact that a Netflix series has been able to be the catalyst of those conversations at this level of awareness is paramount to anything I've ever seen before. Overall, Office Space explores the ideology of capitalism with a focus on bureaucracy in a modern American workplace, while showing a relation of its employees, the Marxist idea of alienation, whilst the 21st century Netflix original Maid details the effects of a male-dominated childcare system and the classist control of female fighting to survive in a Byzantine society.